This is a story about the modern world, in which mankind had to survive a terrible war and end it with the signing of a peace treaty. But even despite this, global nuances remained, because due to the total lack of resources there were a lot of social problems. And the world was once again divided into 4 large neighborhoods. But also there was good news. In the city of Huaxia, Chinese company presented a meta-universe game called Celestial, which will be released in 2155. Its peculiarity is that all the achievements of a person in the game will be reflected in his real life. This beautiful girl with pink hair is called Sonia. Next to her is her assistant named Thomas. Right now the girl goes to her brother, who is in a very serious condition after the recent events. The prognosis of doctors is not the most comforting, so it is necessary to decide how to proceed further. Sonia insisted that the doctors continue to use all methods, all first-class materials, to treat the eastern battlefield, just so that her brother could survive. In response to this request, the aide said with a smile on his face that there was only one thing left that could really help. The peculiarity of this method is that the game maximally stimulates the brain waves of the players, thereby simulating reality. If Leonardo is able to enter the game, then perhaps the game's plot will push his brain to self-development, and after some time will allow him to wake up. Of course, the chances of success are pretty slim, but anyway, not to take advantage of the last possible option is also pretty stupid. So without thinking long, Sonia agreed, and the doctors immediately began the process of launching the game. Another difficulty was that the patient is actually underwater. In order for everything to work as correctly as possible and without interruptions, the game goggles had to be modernized and made so that they could be used underwater without any problems, as well as special insulated wiring. Leonardo felt as if his soul had left his body and moved completely into this game world because of his serious condition. The first time he did not understand what was happening, because everything around him seemed very strange and incomprehensible. But it is not surprising, because at the moment the man is right in the middle of the forest, in some tattered clothes, and in his hands there is a prehistoric tool, which in the normal world no one has long been used. Then the boy ran to the nearest puddle to at least look at his reflection. The first thing that frightened him is that the appearance was radically different. The guy was not even roughly similar to himself from real life. In the story of the game, this little boy annoys absolutely everyone, does not have a penny behind his back, and works very hard to at least somehow feed himself. As Leonardo could not even roughly suspect that he was in the game, he assumed that he had moved to another time, and became a very poor orphan. Over time, the guy felt that he was just insanely bad. For sure this is due to the fact that the previous owner of this body, at best, ate once a day. The only thing that is happy in this situation is a beautiful, dense, green forest, beautiful nature, which you can look at forever, but not on an empty stomach. Based on the object in Leonardo's hands, he immediately realized that in order to survive in this world he would have to work hard with his hands. In this case, our hero immediately went to the mine to get some valuable stones. He did his work with such great enthusiasm that after each blow you could see sparks. This definitely confirms the fact that the guy is insanely hungry and wants to finish as soon as possible. But in the process, instead of finding some valuable stones, Leonardo found some object that looked very much like a metal sword. Of course, out of curiosity, he tried to pull it out, but frankly it was quite difficult to do so, because the sword was stuck very tightly in the ground. In the end, after about 30 minutes of persistent attempts to bring it to an end, Leonardo still managed to get the sword from under the earth, after which there was even a small explosion, but nevertheless the boy remained completely intact, and began a detailed examination of his catch. To put it mildly, he was not very pleased with this find, because from the outside the weapon was badly damaged, and it is far from certain that the market for it will offer any amount of money. As suddenly a huge man came into the cave, and began to claim that this sword belongs to him, so he asked to return the find. Of course Leonardo was just shocked by such insolence, and immediately refused, because this is his personal prey and no one has the right to come and try to take it away. As the man realized that the boy was very weak, he completely stopped observing any personal boundaries and grabbed him by his clothes. And began to tell me that Leonardo's personal energy is affected by the unicorn brand. In his opinion, this means that our hero will never be able to cultivate, and accordingly, the sword is now also useless to him. So the best option would be to just give it to his uncle, and forget it like a bad dream. When our hero realized that this conversation is going to a dead end, without wasting a minute decided to act more harshly. To begin with, to distract the opponent, he struck a blow with his fingers both eyes, then right in the throat, and at the end of the kick on the younger brother, if you know what I mean. As soon as the attack was completed, the guy was convinced that this triple combo seemed to work perfectly in all worlds and immediately started to run away to get as far away as possible before the opponent came to his senses. But unfortunately it was not that simple. The thing is that Leonardo, quite poorly acquainted with the terrain, and in an attempt to escape accidentally ran to the cliff. Now he urgently needs to find where to run further, or just stand and pray to all the gods. The opponent in turn, instead of dealing with the guy personally, simply used force and pushed him downward. The only downside was that when the guy finally fell down, he would take this wonderful sword with him. Meanwhile, the flight was very long. Leonardo had time to develop just a huge speed, which in turn is as dangerous as possible. After landing, Leonardo was lying on the floor completely unconscious, and next to him was flying some little girl. She became madly curious about who it is, so she decided to help, but rather unconventional way, namely with the help of toes closed his nose, and waited until the boy woke up. As strange as it may sound, but this method really worked. After only a few minutes due to lack of oxygen, the guy finally woke up. By the way, the name of this beautiful lady Felicia, judging by her fancy outfit and ability to fly, we can assume that this is some kind of important person. First thing, as soon as Leonardo was able to talk again, he asked the girl what she was. In this case, Felicia decided not to be modest, and said that the guy can call her dream girl, no matter how narcissistic. But in this case, you cannot even argue. As it turns out, Felicia is actually the spirit of the sword the guy found, and saved him after falling from such a great height. Leonardo thought it would be a good idea to thank her for her help, but so far all he got in return was ridicule for blushing too much. Then Felicia found out that the guy had problems with his personal energy and cultivation, so she thought it would be a good idea to help him out and give him a chance to improve himself. Literally in a few minutes, magical manipulations, the process was successfully completed. Leonardo almost instantly felt his body overflowing with a brand new energy that was prone to cultivation. Now he had absolutely no obstacles and was able to live life to the fullest. As payment for the service rendered, the guy will be forced to carry a sword with him absolutely always, and in case Leonardo will not fulfill this request, Felicia will make it so that he will never be able to function normally again. Everything is solely in his hands. In principle, the guy did not mind and was very grateful, but he did not like that Felicia would not stop calling him little, because in fact he is already a grown-up and confident man. Suddenly Leonardo felt a kind of heaviness, his legs began to shake, and it became more and more difficult to stand in place. As for this girl said that there is nothing wrong, just at the moment Leonardo has a depletion of spiritual energy. To replenish it is enough to just sleep, and then everything will fall into place. In general, Felicia extremely hopes that he for the rest of his life will remember this moment, and will always adhere to the agreement. Then without even waiting for an answer, the girl began to atomize in space, and as a powder slowly began to return back to his sword. Honestly speaking, the guy was very scared, because so far he could not understand whether to be happy about this discovery or not, whether it would cause more problems or positives. But at least in the background of this situation, Leonardo remembered the ancient legend, which says that there is only one of the 10 strongest named swords containing the soul of the white dragon. If it is really him, then the guy is really lucky. Well, let's not dwell too much on this topic for now, because there is a more important issue at the moment. It's been quite some time, and Leonardo hasn't eaten anything. He's on the verge of exhaustion, and he doesn't even know how to get out of here. During the inspection of the territory, quite by accident right in the middle of the bushes, the guy noticed bright red eyes. He immediately realized that it is some wild animal, and immediately prepared for battle. In the end it turned out to be just a huge wild boar, which is at least several times larger than Leonardo. The only normal option was to take the fight, win it, and then cook the delicious meat over a fire. Judging by the menacing expression on Leonardo's face, he is fully prepared and will do his best. Having waited for the most opportune moment for himself, the boy jumps out of his seat and just with one hand rushed at the boar. To be frank, he did not even see him as an opponent, but just a potential option for a good bite. The boar lost orientation and fell to the ground after a powerful blow with his fist. Well, based on this fight, we can say with certainty that the energy that Felicia had endowed the guy with really works. He became much stronger and more confident. Because just half an hour ago he was afraid of some grown man, and now he could handle a huge boar in just a few seconds. He was surprised when he met him again, because the height was quite impressive, and without the intervention of otherworldly forces, hardly anyone could have survived. In principle, this time Leonardo was not scared at all, because he realized that at the moment his personal power was much higher, and if it was necessary to resist, he would not run away in any case. As a result, without even a normal conversation, the man immediately attacked the guy with fists. Apparently he was so much offended that he was ready to give everything, just to finish Leonardo once for all. But this time the boy was not confused and immediately realized how he could answer well and hard, with the help of a huge, fat boar lying on his back. The blow was so powerful that the man flew a few dozen meters away, and landed with his insolent face right in the ground. Perhaps after that he will realize that it is not worth trying to bully the younger ones, because in fact they too can fight back, and thus stand up for themselves. His opponent's astonishment was unprecedented, because he had never thought that some skinny, small guy would be able to resist him in any way. But now the man had to think hard, and give at least a few good reasons why Leonardo shouldn't destroy him right now. Instead of starting to sketch out some options, the man started asking the guy how he managed to regain his cultivation. But that wasn't what Leonardo wanted to hear. In that case, he had to step on his face and say it again in case he had trouble hearing. But unfortunately the second time the man also made a mistake. Instead of giving reasons, he started threatening his family, and saying that if even one hair from his head falls, his father will surely find Leonardo and put him in his place, because he is the greatest master of martial arts. Well, since there was no really adequate answer, Leonardo decided to remind his rival in what position he is in. Of course, maybe his father is really a master, but at the moment he will not help him in any way, and if the guy really wants to, he will do anything. After these hard blows, the man actually came down to earth a little, and already spoke to me a little differently. According to him, Leonardo can't commit such a crime because it is against the laws of Tianqi City, namely Article 221, Part 1, the deprivation of life of the descendants of the Dachan dynasty. Well, it is true that there is such a law, you cannot destroy people of this level, but in this case you can do a little differently, namely, to come up with a unique legend. For example, a young man went hunting and was destroyed by a piece of pig meat, and Leonardo in turn rushed to help, but unfortunately did not have time. But Leonardo in any case will remain in the plus, because heroically defeated this piece of meat, and when he returns home, the parents of the bereaved warrior will be madly grateful to him, because Leonardo did them such a favor. He will be a real hero, recognized by the whole city. This story scared the man quite a lot, and made him think that Leonardo is really not joking, and with a great desire will realize all his plans. And when the boy took his sword in his hands, he began to go mad, crying loudly and gradually losing consciousness. In this case, Leonardo, despite all the difficulties that brought this man, decided not to kill him, and just take all the valuable things and leave to lie there. When the guy counted how much money was stolen, he was upset, to put it mildly, because it is not the amount of money he had hoped for. But any way you look at it, even a penny like that is definitely better than nothing. When the dark night came, General Jack and Princess Karina were traveling through the forest towards the city to solve some issues. Suddenly, the general felt that there was someone nearby and ordered him to get out. As it turned out, it was Leonardo. He deliberately hid in the bushes, so as not to interfere with the column, which is already moving at a fairly high speed. Since Jack was on pretty good terms with the father of the guy, he is always happy to meet his son and talk a little. He also almost immediately felt that the guy's inner energy was working at full capacity again, and of course he congratulated him on that, because being able to cultivate was probably the best thing in the world. When the guys had talked it over, Jack introduced Leonardo to his companion, and told him how to address her properly. As soon as the boy realized who stood in front of him, he was really shocked, because this is the only surviving princess of the ruling dynasty of Dachin. And frankly, she's just insanely beautiful. When the boy began to bow to her, the girl immediately smiled, because in fact, she does not require such a high attitude. It is enough just a human greeting and a beautiful, intelligible speech. In general, since recently, Karina is essentially no different from Leonardo. Because of the attack of ill-wishers, was forced to go on the run, and apparently forever leave their possessions. Then the talk came about the boar. For some reason the guys were just madly interested in what Leonardo is going to do with it, sell or keep it. If we think logically in this situation, then of course it should be sold, because the boy would not be able to eat it whole anyway, but he would get money for a couple of months of his life. When the general heard this answer, he asked the boy not to sell it, but to keep it for himself, for the meat could be kept for a long time in a cold room. And the money for accommodation and basic food like rice and vegetables, Jack will allocate it personally, because he understands that when a person becomes a cultivator, his appetite increases significantly, and without meat in this case, there is no way, so these actions can be considered a kind of small investment. Also, since the boy was about to turn 14, the general reminded him that the boys of the dynasty were already joining the army at that age. And when he and his father were at that age, they had already been through several battles, at which time one of them was commanding 3 regiments, the other was an assistant. In short, the general and His Highness will be looking forward to Leonardo's personal growth. Of course, in response, the boy said that he would do his best to cultivate, and would not let Jack down in any way, because he was interested in it himself. Specifically, this army is the only armored human army that dares to resist demons and monsters. It's scary to imagine how powerful their training is that they recruit people from the age of 14. In any case, Leonardo is sure they won't have to wait long. As soon as our hero got home, he was finally able to relax a little bit, because the whole day is just insanely tired. But even on arrival he was met with an unpleasant surprise in the form of a guest, who for some reason thought that to break into someone else's home, and stay there all the time would be a pretty good idea. Of course, the guy is not on a joke frightened, and immediately took extreme measures, because almost 100% sure that in his house is some thief or someone else. But as it turned out later, everything is not so terrible. It was an acquaintance of our hero named Robert. With what purpose he came it is not yet known, but it got him not weak. Despite the fact that the guest is essentially to blame, he also managed to take offense at the guy for such a mildly bad hospitality. In fact, Robert came here with many intentions. He knows how Leonardo has been starving lately, so he thought it would be nice to cook something. This time it would be 5 meat kinkali and 5 aniseed. When Leonardo saw this food with his own eyes, he rejoiced like a little child, because he knew how delicious it was. He even cried for joy, but for Robert it was too much, so he took a step away from it. When he saw what a huge booty Leonardo had brought, he was pleased and impressed. Initially the man assumed that all this was due to a trap, but the boy immediately admitted to him that in fact it was done by hand, and that his inner energy is fully restored. Robert decided to start with a little light punch right in the stomach, to get revenge for Leonardo's bad taste in guests, and then to congratulate him on his new stage of life. They chatted a little about it, and then the man saw the boy's baby sniffles, and they almost fought again. On the way, the guys noticed a fishing rod, and next to it 4 big tasty fish. As it turned out, Another friend of Leonardo's had left it especially for Leonardo, because he had gone on an urgent mission, and he had no opportunity to collect it with him. When Robert started to leave, the guy asked him to stay and try the specialty roast pork, but unfortunately the man had to refuse because he was already delayed, although he had promised his family that he would be back within half an hour. Well, in this case, our hero has nothing to do but to continue to deal with meat, namely marinate, partially sell, and with a great desire to eat. Suddenly, someone bursts into Leonardo's territory, and the most interesting thing is that without an invitation. These guys were not satisfied with the fact that there was a new entrepreneur in the market, who took away almost all their customers with his cheap meat, but this was not the main reason for their visit. A man named Oliver, still as promised, complained to his family, and came to the showdown. This time he invited his brother Tyson with him to try and retrieve the sword he had failed to get in the first place. Oliver warned his brother not to underestimate Leonardo, because his power had grown considerably in the last 24 hours. Even so, Tyson still felt as confident as possible, and never for a second allowed himself to think that he could lose to such a weak opponent, but fortunately it didn't last long. Leonardo was able to bring him to the ground with just one of his accurate punches. Oliver honestly couldn't believe his eyes, how the guy could take on his powerful brother so easily. Then, so that neither of them would be offended, Leonardo thought it was only fair that the two of them, brother for brother, should get punched in the face for trespassing. In the end, these guys flew so far that their bodies were stopped by passers-by with the help of their legs. Completely by accident, their boss saw the whole picture from the side, and decided to come closer to figure out what was going on here, and how it happened that his subordinates were flying all over the city. The first thing the man asked Tyson what he was doing here, because in fact the subordinate should be on military exercises, the postponement of which is not provided. Then, full of anger and rage, Leonardo went outside to finish his rivals, but when he saw who was standing near them, he immediately calmed down. As soon as the little girl saw him, so immediately with tears in her eyes ran to the meeting, because she madly loves the guy and in case something happens to him, she just cannot calmly survive it. Good thing this time Leonardo was completely intact, and the girl can exhale with relief. After a full examination, Uncle Justin came up to the boy and asked him what the two men had done. In response, it was decided not to be modest, to tell it like it is, and maybe even embellish it. In general, two bandits broke into a private property in broad daylight and started trying to beat up its owner. Let's hope that now they will face the harshest punishment for such gross violations. After all, a military man is a man who is created to protect civilians, but in no case vice versa. After hearing the story, Justin's complexion even changed. He just could not believe that his battalion has such a terrible discipline. He was also furious at the fact that these two were ruining his reputation, and if such incidents were to recur, Justin could lose his position without the possibility of reinstatement. In the meantime, the bandits were already on their knees, apologizing. The funny thing is that in this city such robberies are strictly forbidden. He who abused civilians must be suspended from cultivation, and if a civilian lost his life, the offender will be sentenced to life without the right to pardon. Let's start with Tyson. By his actions he has willfully violated the officer's regulations, for which he will be suspended from cultivation opportunities and expelled from the army without ever being able to serve again. Then the actions of Citizen Oliver, namely robbery and looting. Fortunately, he did not have time to seriously harm the life and health of a civilian, so he will simply be deprived of the right to cultivation. In Justin's opinion, this sentence is too weak, because in fact, he just lacked the ability. Evil intentions are also worth punishing, because if you look at it from a psychological point of view, he definitely intended something bad and just couldn't realize it. In the end, since these guys are from another city, they will just be lowered by one level of cultivation, but if it happens again, they won't escape execution. When finally this situation was completely closed, Justin left on his business, and the little girl stayed together with Leonardo. Honestly speaking, she was a little upset, because her father had just returned from the war, and instead of giving time to her, immediately began to do his own things. And the most frustrating thing is that this happens almost every time, and in fact the daughter practically does not see her father. Unfortunately it is really so, but otherwise he just cannot, because there is a war in the country, and now practically everything is kept on the army, so a sensible leader has to work always. Anyway, for now, the little girl doesn't have to worry too much, because while her father is busy, she and Leonardo can have fun playing together. When the boys got close to the river, Mia asked her friend to catch a couple of lobsters for her so she could have fun playing with them. Of course, to refuse such a little guy just could not afford, so immediately went into the water, and slowly began to catch everything that comes under his hand. As it turned out, crayfish here is more than enough. If you catch them quite a large number, you can make a lot of money, a great business. As soon as Leonardo came closer, he immediately showed her how many crayfish he had already caught. At first she was very surprised, and then the question arose in her mind, what to do with so many crayfish. Now Leonardo would show it all, for he had already had a brilliant idea in his head, namely, to take them home as soon as possible, and cook them deliciously. As a result, the odor from this exquisite dish was so strong that even being in the market Robert smelled it, and involuntarily went straight to it. The little girl immediately admitted that such beauty she sees for the first time in her life, yes, and in general did not know that these crayfish can be eaten. In this case, the guy immediately offered her to try, but even despite such an attractive look and smell, at first the girl refused, because she was very afraid. And when she saw Robert devouring them with appetite, the interest took over. Mia tasted them and was pleasantly surprised, because the dish was really delicious. As a result, sitting at the table, the clear day had already changed to late night, and the guys were still sitting and eating crayfish non-stop. Meanwhile, the guys who broke into Leonardo's territory today weren't having as much fun. Because Oliver's right arm was badly damaged, now even if he continued to practice, his achievements would still be lower than everyone else's. In fact, there was no point in practicing anymore. When Oliver's father realized that because of some civilian, his son will create throughout his life, then inside ignited the most real fire, the desire for revenge gradually began to take over. But in this case, the most important thing is not to lose your head, and to elaborate the plan of action to the last detail. The problem is that it's easy enough to say, but in fact it's almost impossible to create such a plan, because in these parts, the army strictly forbids the destruction of people in the city, and if it happens, the offender is simply executed without a lot of talk and a chance for pardon. In that case, it was a brilliant idea to hire a mercenary to do all the dirty work. Of course, services of this kind are as expensive as possible here, but in any case it's much better than risking yourself and jeopardizing your precious reputation. In the morning the guys were so full that they could not move, but even so, Robert with great enthusiasm offered to cook more for the evening. In response to such a tempting idea, Leonardo decided to refuse, because first of all, the good should be a little bit, and secondly, spices are quite expensive. But even this was not a problem, because he was ready to invest and buy everything he needed. When Leonardo realized that it was useless to talk to the man, he reminded him that the cooking process was not only about spices, but also about fishing, cleaning, and so on. While the guys were arguing among themselves, Mia wasted no time and decided to take another look in the bucket to see if there was anything left. As soon as she found the last crayfish, she immediately took it out of the bucket and announced to the whole world that she would get the last tasty treat, and started eating right away. But it was a fatal mistake to announce such a valuable find in the hearing. The princess did not take into account the fact that Robert was next to her, and of course, almost immediately paid for it with her last cancer. On joy, the man ran so fast that just a few seconds later he was near the exit. In the end it all came to the point that the guys went to the city and started running there. To stop them, Leonardo started to say that if the guys want crawfish so much, he will cook them only a little later. But unfortunately even this did not help, and they continued to catch up with each other. On the way, the guy noticed his close acquaintance, who spent a lot of time with him when he was still a kid. As a rule, When such a person meets Leonardo cannot afford to pass by and necessarily stops to say hello as a sign of respect. As soon as the boy ran on, someone else came up to him and told him that Leonardo wasn't exactly the same as he had been before, that someone had probably gotten inside him. Charlie thought about it, too, but even though he was so close to him, he had no desire to find out. To make sure he was completely neutral, the man decided to ask one last tricky question and asked him to answer honestly. If Leonardo didn't say hello right now, would Charlie destroy this reincarnated soul or not? But there was no definite answer, for the second man was first of all a doctor, and by the laws of this city he had no right at all to talk so lightly about taking a life. Then Charlie suddenly went about his business and asked him to look after the bookstore while he was busy. Meanwhile, Leonardo finally caught up with the guys and tried his best to stop them. The main problem was that Robert could not stop teasing the little girl, although given his age it is the most incorrect and unmanly. Meanwhile, the mercenary was already in position, waiting for the best moment to strike a decisive blow and instantly pop out an order about Leonardo. As soon as such an opportunity appeared, he immediately gathered all his strength into a fist and was ready to destroy the guy, despite the fact that there was a little girl next to him. But as it turned out later, it wasn't quite that simple. After those strange questions, Charlie felt something wrong and decided to go straight to Leonardo's place so that he could help him and not let anyone hurt him. In the end, he arrived just in time to block the blow. As it is, the mercenary should be given credit, because he chose just the perfect place to destroy a man, without any witnesses and without any risks of getting punished. The man was just mad when he realized that his plans were interfered with by some bookstore owner. Charlie argued that it was forbidden to take human life in these parts. Instead of trying to escape, the evil mercenary began threatening the man and saying that he should not have gotten involved in the wrong business, because now he would have to destroy 2 targets at once, not just one. In response to such a wild aggression, Charlie could only laugh and show by example that it would not be possible to defeat him so easily. In a good way, the mercenary should learn manners and to communicate normally with people, then maybe you could think about a pardon. With just one arm movement, Charlie was able to block his opponent's attack and push him a long distance away, so that he would not even think of coming back, let alone trying to threaten with his childish abilities, with which he would never be able to do anything. To be honest, if Charlie had a real opportunity to destroy his rival, he would have taken it without a second thought, but unfortunately the law wouldn't allow it. The only thing the kids saw was the mercenary flying through the air to an unknown destination. Suddenly some military man came up to Leonardo and handed him a letter, a call to the guard troops. Tomorrow morning he was obliged to report to the camp with it. In principle, the guy was not against the army, but he was just madly confused by the fact that all this happened so quickly, even not on reaching 14 full years of age. The next day the guy was already fully prepared. He took out of the closet outfit that previously belonged to his father. At the persuasive request of Leonardo, specially saved it, just until the first day when he will enter the military service. Then Robert appeared on the horizon. First of all, he came with some gift, and secondly, he glorified Leonardo as much as never before, telling him that very soon he would become a great hero who was one step away from achieving the title of Genius Master of the Sword. It all sounded as beautiful as possible, but even so, the boy still asked him to stop, because he was still far away from such titles. In this huge sack, as a dowry for the future warrior, put a gorgeous white cloak, which perfectly matched this military uniform. After a few more minutes of socializing, as sad as it may sound, it was time to go to the ceremony and slowly say goodbye. Realizing how much Leonardo was leaving, Robert decided not to waste the opportunity and asked that when he returned from the service, he be sure to cook more crawfish. Of course, the guy promised that when he returned he would cook them, but for now he had to go, and asked his friends not to stand here for long, so that they would not get cold, because no matter how they had summer clothes, and the temperature here is quite low and you can get very sick. Mia has already started coughing. When Robert saw that the little girl was too upset, he decided to cheer her up a little, to remind her that Leonardo would be a master swordsman when he returned, and he would take them out for a nice meal and so on. But apparently such a speech didn't help much, because the little girl still resented him for the last incident. And so went already 2 years, from the moment when the guy first entered the service. Frankly speaking, everything goes not so bad, but the only thing that maximally annoys Leonardo is that there is a perpetual winter. At first he was hoping to the last that it is not so, but after so much time has already realized that the warmth he will not see. But this time he will have to do something extremely dangerous, namely to take 2 letters that came recently, and go with them on a very long winter journey. This hike is dangerous for only 3 main reasons. The first is the savage cold, the second is the unknown route, and the third is all sorts of evil that can meet on the way, and try in various ways to destroy Leonardo. In general, you need to dress very warmly, and be as vigilant as possible. In the end, after only about half an hour of his journey, the guy has already fully had time to feel all the effects of this hike. The snow was so strong that because of it was almost impossible to see anything. It makes the path much more difficult, because at any moment you can go off course, and go the wrong way. As suddenly Leonardo began to hear someone's voice, and when he came closer, he saw a beautiful girl kneeling right in the middle of this icy hole. Honestly speaking, he could not even guess where she came from, especially without warm clothes, but only in one dress. But even despite such a stylish frost, instead of just unite and stand like a statue, the girl just cried, and begged the guy to give her some help. For her rescue she promised to become a servant, and fulfill absolutely any whims of her master. In a moment Leonardo finally came to his senses. He remembered his commander's words that these parts are full of evil things, but certainly not nice girls who are ready to become maids for salvation. One punch in the face put everything in its place. As it turned out, this creature could even fly, and despite such an aggressive response, did not stop trying to make the guy's head spin. When they had the closest eye contact, the girl began to use her magic to make Leonardo think only of her, and agree to all her requests. This magic was so strong that even though the guy didn't really want anything, his body was no longer obeying, and almost completely obeyed this girl. From the outside it looks as if he was ready for anything, but in fact in his head, was thinking about how to escape from here. In the end it went so far that the girl gradually moved on to the process of soul absorption. But to bring it to the end, of course, she did not succeed, because the soldier who was following Leonardo's footsteps found out in time and what a difficult situation the guy was in, and put his sword right in her back. Of course, to defeat a monster of this scale, it would not be enough, but at least the effect of magic from Leonardo will be reduced, and he will be able to continue to function normally. The most important thing is that right now the guy should move as far away as possible, and no longer look into the eyes of this thing. As the girl just madly angry, between the guys immediately began a fierce battle. In general, she herself just adores male souls, and will fight to the victorious end to get at least a few of these rare specimens. But in fact, not all that bad, because the guy who came to the rescue has not once fought with such creatures. There is a simple strategy to follow, and then everything will work out. The first thing you need to do is to go to the maximum open meadow. Then wait for the opponent to use his magic powers, and at the same moment create what's called a circle. The thing is that this kind of evil cannot cross the boundaries of the circle and in general cannot tolerate anything round. Now to fight with it becomes much easier, but still it is not the end yet. Because the girl still has the ability to block blows, no matter how strong they are. Suddenly a third military man appears on the horizon, thanks to the fact that he knows a special spell, was able to seal for a certain time the girl's abilities and thus gave the guy the opportunity to attack the 3 of them well. As a result of such a powerful blow, it simply could not withstand it, and dissolved into small particles. As soon as all this horror was over, the guys sat down by the fire, took out their water bottles, and took a sip of water for a successful job done. In this case, Leonardo decided to ask about this monster in more detail, so that in the future to learn how to fight against them properly, and how not to get under the influence of their magic. In general they are called snow women, to become such a creature it is enough to be a girl, to come to this winter and freeze here to the pulse loss. When the transformation process is complete, these monsters begin to prey on young men and consume their souls. Frankly, Leonardo is lucky, because they can do it with a single kiss, just a second's work. After this story, the guy realized for himself that the commander simply deceived him, and specifically gave such a task, so that Leonardo never came back. How cruel it must be to force a 15-year-old boy to go alone 10 miles, through a winter forest with monsters. In this case, the guys asked Leonardo if he had crossed the road. In response to this question, the guy said that when he was still a civilian, he beat up 2 bandits who invaded his territory and began to extort personal belongings. Their names are Oliver and Tyson. Now, when the situation has been fully analyzed, everything is in its place. It turns out the current commander, Leonardo, is Oliver's father, so that without much noise to take revenge, he ordered the boy to go on a trip from which, as a rule, no one returns. Meanwhile, the enemy family discussed among themselves Leonardo. To put it mildly, they were dissatisfied with the fact that even though the guy serves their father, he still breathes the same air with them, although he should have lost his life at the beginning of the service. Why he is so resilient remains a mystery. During these 2 years their sister Tatiana had already had time to grow up, and frankly speaking, she hated Leonardo as much as the rest of her family for what he did to her brother, and when the guys got the information that the guy was in town at the moment, she promised everyone that she would have time to destroy him during the rotation period. Of course, such a good idea in family circles immediately supported, and added that if there is anything needed for the realization of the plan, it will be possible to get absolutely everything. So far, Tatiana is determined not to resort to brute force, but to build everything so that there was not even a trace of her at the scene of the crime. In fact, there are quite a few ways to do it. The most important thing is to choose the right one and implement it correctly. For starters, Tatiana thought that it would be good to get closer to Leonardo, talk a little, and get to a more trusting level. She was the first to say hello and asked him if he remembered her. As it turned out, he did remember her, but the problem is that Tatiana had proven herself to be such a heartless and cruel woman even in her childhood, not in the kindest terms. Leonardo was almost 100% sure that since those times nothing has changed, because in her family she is basically all like that, and in general, as a rule, people do not change character throughout life. Since the guy realizes she is really like that, he decided not to even try the berries, and just gave them to the children. Out of politeness before going home, the guy invited Tatiana to his house to drink a little tea, but she refused and said that it would be better to walk with the children. In the depths of Leonardo understood that there is clearly something wrong here. Just one surname of this girl entails some kind of a trick. Suddenly someone knocked on the front door. To be honest, the guy was a little surprised, because today he was not expecting guests. When he opened the door, he saw a little boy crying. The thing is that since recently he became an orphan, and has to beg all the time, but lately even in this way he could not get money. Since Leonardo knew Daniel since he was in diapers, and knew his father pretty well, he couldn't help him. From today the boy can consider this house his own, and eat all the food that is in it. Also right now the guy will cook something specially, because there is nothing even to feed the child. As a result, Leonardo had nothing else in the house but crayfish, so he had to cook them as much as possible, because the guy knew that Robert and Mia would come running to the delicious smell. And so it happened, as soon as he took them outside, the guests didn't make him wait long. At one point Robert decided to speak out about the child. In his opinion, Leonardo will not be able to bear such hard work, because he himself barely makes ends meet. When the guy realized that the guest was starting to allow himself too much, he decided to stick a crab in his mouth to shut him up. And he told the kid not to believe this uncle, and to think that everything is fine, because there is no task in this world that Leonardo could not cope with. When Robert realized that he was wrong, he decided to tell that he had one easy way to make money quickly, and thus provide himself for life. Meanwhile, Tatiana, as well as all members of the family, was warned that Leonardo is not the same as he was before, and if she really wants to deal with him, she must do it as carefully as possible, otherwise he will not wait long for a blowback. In response, she confirmed that she understood the risks, and promised that the boy would not live until tomorrow morning, and added that this was the last time she would help the family in the destruction of a man, and that it should be done exclusively by the brothers or the father. Then when the late night came, Leonardo together with the baby were already sweetly sleeping. Just about this time Tatiana was going to turn her dirty plans. With the help of magic she created a huge sword, the task of which was to fly into the territory of the guy, and remain right in his heart. But as you might expect, because the girl was in a hurry and did not thoroughly study her opponent, she failed, because the guy also has strong magic, and it protects him absolutely at any time of day. In this case, the lion, which was in the form of a statue, suddenly came to life, and rushes straight at this sword. In the end, the damage for that night was only one lion statue. Now it would have to try to repair it somehow, or just replace it with a new one. In the morning, it was hard to imagine how this could have happened. This sculpture was very valuable for Leonardo, because it was made personally by his father. Then one of the guests remembered that this stone lion is able to drive away evil spirits, so it probably took away some trouble from the guy, and thus allowed him to stay alive that night. When Tatiana saw the consequences of her blow, she was just mad. Now she felt that Leonardo was really unusual, because he was able to survive the spell with the spell of the sacred sword. Usually when a person is made such an order, the chances of his survival are extremely small. Charlie then personally contacted Tatiana, and informed her that he was extremely pleased with her behavior, because of some personal grudge she had ruthlessly let down the danger of all the people living here. But instead of simply accepting her guilt, the girl picked up a sword and tried to attack the powerful warrior. Of course, it was simply a fatal mistake on her part, and there will be a heavy price to pay for such cruelty. From that moment on, Tatiana is no longer allowed to cultivate and to engage in spiritual practices. The only thing she is allowed to do is to live like a normal person, without any contact with magic. Also, she has less than 24 hours to leave this city for good. In case it does not happen, Tatiana will not even be left alive. When Charlie has completely completed his mission, he left the girl lying on the floor, and because of her overly attractive appearance, men immediately started to approach her. But since she is a girl with spikes, no one managed to get acquainted with her, but considering her terrible character, it's for the best. Suddenly some girl came up to Leonardo and asked him if he was an NPC or not. To be honest, the guy didn't even know what to say, so he just sent her to the city. As it turned out, the first beta testing of the game has already begun. Now together with Leonardo in this world there are not only NPCs, but also a whole bunch of real players, who still do not understand what is going on here, and how to play this game correctly. Even little Daniel noticed that the new girls are very beautiful. In principle Leonardo agrees with him, but their clothes are too bright, so do not dress even in the great Shang dynasty. Now the girls' questions about NPCs and teleportation points do not leave Leonardo's head. All these words seem quite familiar to him. But at least for now there is no time to think about it, because at the moment, the guys are implementing the very business plan that Robert told them about yesterday. He suggested that they go to the river and collect their 15 kilograms of crayfish, but to make the task easier, they need to make a stun punch right into the water. Now Leonardo will try it, and it will be clear whether it makes any sense or not. In the end, after a powerful stunning blow, not only crayfish, but also a whole bunch of different kinds of fish surfaced. Now we can say with certainty, the business plan really works and has a place. To be honest, little Daniel was shocked by the huge amount of crayfish and different fish, so he immediately began to collect them. Meanwhile, Sophia, together with her assistant, watched her brother's capsule, because they realized that he was no longer alone there, and could communicate with people. Also the girl had just a huge desire to get in touch with these players, but unfortunately to do this is impossible, because the ID of players who participated in the testing is absolutely confidential, and ordinary people do not have access to this data, only the developers. In this case, the guys have nothing else to do but to wait further. Anyway, they are in no hurry and with a great desire the experiment can last for years. Recently, one very respectable man returned from the front line. The only downside is that he behaved too pathos, could calmly insult the waiter, and still feel more than normal. But there is also one very fat plus in this man. If some institution or person manages to surprise him with a unique dish, it automatically becomes popular, and begins to bring the owner just a huge amount of money on the background of constant demand. Everyone knows that this warrior is very picky about food, and if he likes something, it means that it will definitely be delicious for everyone. Of course, Leonardo just couldn't help but use this opportunity to promote his signature dish and make a lot of money on it. The military hasn't even tasted it yet, but just by the smell he realized that this is exactly what he wants at the moment. During the meal, he lost speech, and instead of saying anything, he just ate non-stop, because he had not tasted so good for a long time. Even little Daniel, looking at all this from the outside, slowly began to realize that they have absolutely every chance to become rich. But on the way out of the restaurant, Leonardo was waiting for not the most pleasant picture, namely the next two daredevils, who had a mad desire to avenge him for what he did to Oliver. The only problem is that this time, the guys are much stronger than they were before, and it's hard to know how to fight them properly. Before the fight began, they also warned Leonardo that this time no one would help him. But even in spite of such loud statements, Daniel was on a great enthusiasm, and confidently informed the bandits that Leonardo did not need any help to defeat the likes of them. As soon as the conversation reached a stalemate, the opponent immediately demonstrated his strength, and thus made it clear that this fight could not be simple. Because of such a powerful wave of fire, the guys even flew a few meters to the side, but at least the landing was soft. After this, Leonardo at once handed over his card for the little fellow, and ordered him to go as soon as possible to the camp to find the manager there and call here. In turn, the lad would do his best to hold out as long as possible on the battlefield, and await the coming of the consumption. Without wasting a moment, Daniel starts running towards the camp, and Leonardo starts doing his best to dodge the attacks as efficiently as possible. Despite the fact that the fight had just begun, the opponent was already as angry as possible. Apparently he was counting on the fastest possible victory, and the realization that Leonardo could stall for time displeased him immensely. Because if the elders saw what was happening here, they would surely punish the culprit to the full extent of the law. The guy was much stronger and faster than his opponent could offer, though how could he be underestimated, since 3 family members and 1 mercenary had already lost their cultivation and would never be able to serve in the army again, and one of them had even been banned from this city. In time, Leonardo began to lose all the same. It came to the point that the guy simply fell into the water, and the opponent, with the help of his strength, began to do so that he sank as deep as possible and had no opportunity to get out. Frankly speaking, this is quite a mean trick, and its performer certainly does not deserve respect. Meanwhile, reinforcements finally arrived on the battlefield. Let's hope that the opponent did not have time to inflict some serious hobbies on our hero, and without much trouble he will be able to get out. Reinforcements rushed in so hard that even without too much talk they began to punish the offenders of the guy. Judging by how casually his opponent was acting, he was hoping he could make a deal, but no matter how powerful you are, if you break the basic rules, you'll be punished anyway, even despite all your previous good deeds. In the end, after such a powerful blow, he landed very hard on the ground, and felt the full wrath of the government on him. Even so, he had plenty of enthusiasm. The man raised his head, and despite the fact that he was wrong in this situation, he began to complain, and asked the government to stop hitting him. But all he got in response was another, already more powerful kick from his foot right in the face, after which he would probably have to pick his teeth if he had the chance. Since this wretched delinquent was in the same family as Jack, he thought it would be a good idea to do the family a favor and simply destroy him. He concentrated all his strength into one fist and made a decisive blow, after which the soul leaves the body, and in this case goes to purgatory to serve the punishment for all its sins. Meanwhile, the boys came to the river and couldn't believe what had happened. I wonder if Leonardo will never come back. Frankly, the chances of him surviving are pretty slim, because his relatively weak body had to survive a massive blow from a 16-level warrior. Anyway, Jack ordered his men to patrol the river until they found the guy. The main task is to find the body, and it does not matter whether it will be alive or not. Meanwhile, Charlie and his assistant are working on Leonardo's health, and judging by the way they communicate with each other, the chances of rescue are quite high. The most important thing is just a little time and a quiet environment. Without wasting a minute, the girl gently put him on her lap, and Charlie created a special protective dome to shield the guys from the outside world and give them the opportunity to fully concentrate on the treatment. After only a few minutes under the influence of healing magic, Leonardo began to show signs of life. Of course, he is not yet fully healthy, but it confirms the fact that there is a chance for a speedy recovery. The main thing is not to stop and continue with the same intensity. When the situation gradually started to get better, Felicia arrived at the healing dome. She immediately handed the body to Charlie and told him to take care of Leonardo without her, because she had urgent things to do that could not be cancelled and needed to be done right now. Somehow the man immediately realized where she was going, so he asked her not to make too much noise, because it could attract the elders, and in the future big problems. In general, she went straight to the house, to the family of those offenders Leonardo, and right now will show them clearly what a mistake they made. By the way, they were thinking of a new plan, how they could still try to destroy the guy, in case he survived again. When Marina moved into their house, she overheard their conversation, and immediately informed them that the family was overestimating themselves if they wanted to do such a thing. The next morning, all bandages, and surrounded by his favorite friends, the guy woke up in a hospital bed. His body hurt so badly, as if he had been walking on it all night. Some elephants, but nevertheless the guys were just madly happy that their friend finally, and in the near future, will be able to live a full life. When the little girl saw how badly Leonardo was hurt, she couldn't hold back her emotions and just started crying. To calm her down, the kid started saying that it was just a couple of scratches, and soon they wouldn't be visible at all, so you shouldn't worry about it. Felicia also came to the hospital to support the victim. First of all, she asked how he was feeling, and then she said that she and Charlie should be credited for the rescue, because it was mostly his doing. Leonardo was shocked at how kindly everyone was treating him. Then began the first meal after waking up, so that the guy unnecessarily did not strain his body. Felicia decided to feed him with a spoon and thus again showed her care. Also remind that very soon a ceremony is planned for guys who have reached adolescence, and offered to introduce Leonardo as a member of her family. Initially, the guy didn't even understand what it could mean, and the kids immediately said that it can happen, because they have their own family, and Leonardo will not go anywhere from them. And so it moves to the day of the ceremony. Its essence is that children who have reached the age of 15 years pray under the magic tree and receive his prolongation of the ceremony. Thus a person enters the path of spiritual cultivation or the path of martial arts. Fruits from the highest to the lowest are divided into 4 levels, respectively. The higher the level, the more it carries luck and spiritual powers, such as brown fruit is enough to immediately reach the 10th step of power. It is not worth hoping for such a gift of fate, because as a rule all participants get orange fruit and sometimes green fruit. But taking into account the fact that our hero was the last and before him no one has ever received a brown fruit, he may have an increased chance to get a good color. Before getting the fruit, each contestant must get as close to the tree as possible and dodge 3 times, then just stand and squeeze until the apple falls. Usually it falls almost instantly, but for some reason in Leonardo's case it didn't happen. In his head he was thinking that he was really a soul doomed to loneliness, if even the white tree didn't want to help him. Jack was also very worried. In his opinion Leonardo definitely deserved it, but unfortunately he couldn't influence the falling out of the fetus. When things began to smell fried, the sword decided to help its owner, and with the help of its power plucked for the guy one of the rarest apples, namely of red color. If a person falls such a fruit, it means that he can rise to the 12th step of spiritual development at once. This sword is indeed a powerful joke, before it there is no order or law. The ceremony came to an end. The fruit must not be eaten for 3 days or the spiritual energy will explode, and a gift from the white tree no one has the right to take from his comrades, or there will be severe punishment.